Hello, hello, hello. I am John Cole Morgan and I am trying very hard to get my settings just right. Welcome to my little shop. I run a small shop called Quilt here in Hertfordshire, which many of you already know. And today we are going to talk my favorite type of quilting. It's called kaleidoscope quilting, or as I like to call it, stack and whack. I can never remember if this is the Bethany Reynolds method or the Linda Corsi method, but there are so many different methods going around and they've been around for so long. So forgive me if I don't get the original user's name correct. Apologies. But I am now going to show you what it is I have made, how I make it, what it all means, how it all works, and we're going to go through and see how to do all of this. Now, what I think is always important and what everybody then needs to kind of take a bit of time to consider is the fabric you're going to use to do a stack and whack. Now, theoretically, all fabrics will work, theoretically, but some will be more interesting than others. So the first stack and whack fabric that I used is the gorgeous Renee Nenneman. Oh, she makes the most fabulous fabric. Now you can see there is a lot of interest in this. And what I love is you've got all these different designs and different shapes on these pattern repeats. We will get into all of that in a bit. That when you then cut out your blocks, you end up with something resembling a little bit like that. Now, what I've done with this piece of fabric, and the story behind the fabric is I run a shop and I was doing a sale and I pulled this fabric out and I was trying to sell it and then nobody bought it and I thought, mine, I'm going to keep the fabric. And what I did was, within a day, I'd cut the fabric up into a stack and whack and I made this quilt. So what we'll do in a moment is we'll go around and have a look at the exact elements of this quilt and why it is I think this works so well. So we're now going to do some jiggery pokery. I do not have a wonderful YouTube studio and all of that, so forgive me, you've just looked up my nose, not what you want. So what we do is we look at the initial part of the fabric. So I think it's always important when you do a stack and whack to always have the original fabric on the quilt, because you know that that was the original fabric. And then when you cut it, you get all these amazing elements. So you can see over here, we've got the red flower over there. So you can see that my triangle, this is the triangle you're going to use. I personally use the Creative Grids one more than anything else. You can see that this block over here is made up roughly, you can see that that over there is that over there. So you can see roughly what makes your block really interesting. And now what's really interesting is when you do this, you can see that you've got points on the edge that create a secondary pattern. So when you run your ruler over your fabric, you can see, oh my goodness, that works really, really well. And then if you rotate this round and you do that, oh my goodness, that looks really interesting as well. And I'm probably not going to be able to find that exact one again, but it gives you the idea of how every element of the fabric goes to create an amazing stack and whack. And I think it's really important that you understand that philosophy and that basis, that the fabric needs to be really interesting with interesting elements in it to be able to get blocks that are real. Like, I mean, seriously, how interesting is that? This one, you know, this is just from one fabric, okay? So I think it's just important to remember you want something that's got a little bit of movement, a little bit of interesting bits in it, and not too much background fabric. Now, this is the block that I thought was the most least interesting of the quilt because I got 10 blocks out and I only needed 9. And this is going to go on the back. And then what I do as well is all these little blocks that I've got left over, you can either use those for a pillow or a cushion, or again, you just pop them on the back. So what I wanted to do today was to go through a couple of pieces of fabric We're not picking cornerstones or anything like that. We're just picking the main fabric right now, just to kind of get a rough idea of what it is we are going to use to do our stack and whack. So I'll show you again. This was the original fabric, and then these were the 9 blocks. Whoops. These were the 9 blocks that I got out of it. The designer's name is Renee Nanneman. And I think this was last year, 2022 or 2021's collection. Unfortunately, I've sold out of it now, so I don't have more details of that at the moment. So apologies. And of course, I've cut it and I don't have the salvage. Now, the other fabric that always works really, really well in a stack and whack is a good paisley. So what I was saying before, look at all the interesting elements on this fabric. Really, really interesting. But if you get stuck and you don't quite know if a piece is interesting or not, always the way when you're doing a video, you drop your ruler. If you don't know the fabric's interesting or not, so this is the original fabric. This is Burlap and Lace by Dover Hill for Bernatext. I'm guessing this is a good 5, 6, 7 years old. So again, this is probably out of print. But you can see what's really good about this is you've actually only got a few colors. I think it's, gosh, you've got 9 colors here. But you can see it's mainly dark browns, grays with a creamy background. So it's a little bit monotone. So when you look at that, you think, oh, actually, that's quite interesting. Some really interesting fabrics on there, pieces on there. So when you cut them out to make them, the paisleys make a much softer colorway, a much softer block, and you can go from there. Now, one thing to be aware of, when it comes to your pinning, if you haven't lined up perfectly here, 9 times out of 10, it's your pinning. That will be a sold class that I'm doing on Zoom. But if you don't get your pinning right and you haven't cut it correctly, this still looks beautiful. If you're entering into the Festival of Quilts or into what QuiltCon or anything like that, maybe you want to do it a bit more carefully. But even if you don't do the class and you still cut out normally, it still looks lovely. You don't need to panic about it. So this one, again, I did this as a rush. I didn't do it as I normally would. So you can see, again, it's a little bit squiffy in the middle. But again, a really pretty block. I haven't used the entire stack of this yet. I've just made a few of these blocks just to give you a couple of examples, because I wanted you to be able to see what we were doing. But like that, I think is so much fun. And again, all coming from this fabric. So I think it's just important to always take time to go through your fabric and see what you think is going to work and what you think isn't. So rule of thumb, oh, I've got one other one here. I haven't made anything out of this. I've cut the blocks, but I haven't sewn them yet. But you can see this in itself, loads of really interesting elements in here. So when you put your ruler on it and you want to see what you're going to make, you might not be able to see, but you're following this dark dotted line over here. So you can see if you want to fussy cut that, you can have the little house in the middle. If you want to make the block smaller, because you've got different sizes you can do, you can see that could be a really interesting block. I don't know. I've never used this. So this might be a bit busy. It might be a little bit too one-colory. It might not work. So it's just a case of I think you've just got to take an executive decision as to what you like. And what you can see. Because I think the thing with this one, the Renee Nanneman, you can see lots of colour, lots of bold choices of colours there, lots of contrast. So that pops really, really well. The cornerstones help, I agree. But even if you fold the cornerstones away, that's still really interesting. And this one as well, I think is very interesting. But it's a little more monotone. So you might not want monotone. You might want a little bit more crazy colors. So this fabric might not be for you. So we're going to go through a few fabrics that I've got that I think are going to work well, that I'm personally going to make, maybe not in this sew along. This fabric I adore. I think this is going to be really, really interesting. And if you put your ruler on here, you can see between those lines, that's going to have that beautiful feather in the middle there. It's going to create a nice little circle in the middle with this feather over here. I think this is going to be really fun to make. So I'm definitely making one out of that. And again, paisley. I'm going with this purple paisley with a creamy background. I sell these in my shop as well. And I think it's about £20 for, £18 for 2 yards. But this in itself, you're looking for a pattern repeat. So what a pattern repeat is, first thing you've got to do, oh, I've already cut this, which is helpful. You've got to find your selvage. Okay, so this is your selvage. So you can see as I'm going along, from there to there, you can see that's the same. It's always important to check that you've got a full repeat. So you can see that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. So you've got a full repeat there. So that, from that point there to that point there, is a single pattern repeat. If you want to do it from there to there, that's a single pattern repeat. And what that means is you're going to be having one element of that pattern design all the way along that repeat. So if I did from there to, sorry, I'm getting confused here, to there, you can see I've got 2 pattern repeats. So I've got one of those, one of those, I've got one of those, one of those. Sorry, I got it wrong there. Bear with. Sorry, from there to there is 2 pattern repeats. And you can see I've got 2 of those. I've got 2 of those. So that's 2 pattern repeats there. And you can do 2 pattern repeats with pleasure, or you can do just 1. The advantage of having a smaller pattern repeat like that is you get a lot more blocks. So your blocks won't be really big like this. You're going to end up with a lot more smaller blocks like this. And as you can tell, these get really interesting really quickly. So something like this as a paisley would look really interesting as well. So I love the thought of that. Now, when you look at a fabric like this could be really amazing as well. But for me, there's not enough going on in the background over here for me to use this fabric. I wouldn't use this fabric because I'm not quite sure it would be as fun and vibrant as my Renee Nunneman, because I want something fun like that. So for me, I think this is a bit, it's beautiful. I love it. A shirt, gorgeous backing, love. For a stack and wax, not quite. This is just not quite for me. My choice, you may love it. When I've got something like this, which is quite uniform, chopping those up, you're going to get some really interesting shapes. Some of them may look like eggs. They could look really interesting. But when you cut it out, you may not end up with something quite there. So this might look really good, worth a try. But I'm a little bit underwhelmed by it. So if I had 10 fabrics, this would probably be number 3 from the bottom of the list that I would choose, because it's not quite me. I don't think it would be quite as beautiful. Prove me wrong. Then I've got something totally bonkers. Forgive me. The old adage of stack and whack fabric. The uglier it is, the better your stack and whack. It's hideous, it's awful, but unfortunately, a lot of the time it's true. So when I look at a fabric like this, I get really excited because nothing is the same. Everything is different. It all is so weird and complex and interesting, and I can't wait to cut this up and use it as a stack and whack. But that's me. You may think, look at that and think, oh my God, that's a lot of brown or a lot of umber or a lot of orange, whatever color you want to call it. And it won't work for you. It's got a huge pattern repeat. So you can see from there to there, really big pattern repeat. So this is a, well, it's actually not that huge. It's only 12 inches. But that's a big pattern repeat. So 12 inches, you need at least 9 repeats because you need to have one of the fabrics there. 9 times 12, what's that, 72? So you're looking at just over 2 yards of the fabric before you start. But yeah, that's something that I'm really looking forward to making as a stack and whack. Now this one, lots of really interesting shapes. Personally, I wouldn't use this because I think you'd end up with stuff looking pretty similar to what the designer intended here. Your repeat is really tiny. I personally don't think this would work very well. Give it a go, prove me wrong. Then I look at fabric like this and I get phenomenally excited because I love all these swirly, whirly bits. But again, not really, whatever you make, whatever stack and whack you make out of this, it's not going to be too far from what the original fabric is. So for me, this one's not a win. This one as well, again, so you can see there's really cute little Beatrix Potter bunnies here, really sweet, but there's a lot of background fabric that's empty. So for me, I think that would look really cute, but if it had had some light grey movement in the background, it would have been more interesting. So for me, this is not a win. Now we get on to the ones that I fell head over heels in love with. This is an Adidas sitar. Now, this is an enormous repeat. If I'm not mistaken, I'm just going to double check. Bear with. This is a 24-inch pattern repeat. So you can see you've got the top of the moth over there, going all the way to the top of the moth over there. So that's your pattern repeat. So you're going to need at least, what's 24 times a 9? That's a lot. You're looking at about 6 meters, 5-6 meters of fabric. Beautiful. Look at all those elements. Look at those beautiful shapes, all those different things that would stack out beautifully. This would look stunning. But lots of contrast, lots of color, lots of blue as well. So some of your blocks will be really blue, some of them will be quite red. Gorge. Expensive. Maybe not your first stack and whack. Maybe if you fall in love with the pattern, keep your eye open for one of these. Would look amazing. I have got this in my stash to do. So there we go. Then I look at something like this. Really stunning fabric. Love it. Would it stack? I'm not quite sure it would, because if you look and we put the stack on there, you're going to end up with hexagons. And on the edges where you seam, it's not quite hexagons. So for me, that's not a win. Okay, I'm hoping I'm giving you suggestions of what I'm doing and what I'm doing. So a batik like this, I wouldn't stack and whack this, because when you cut through those and sew them together, it's going to look almost like what the fabric is before. So for me, oh, sorry, £5 for this half meter, if anybody would like it. Sorry. For me, that's not a win. When I look at something like this, this I think could look quite fun, but again, when you cut it, it may look very similar to what it is, but again, really fun. I think this would look quite good. And the difference is, when you look at the background, you've got lots of movement in the background, whereas this one, you can see pretty uniform. The dots aren't symmetrical, which is great. I love this as a batik on its own, but do I love this as a stack and whack when I cut it up? Because once I've resewn it, the blobs are just a slightly different shape and size and all of that. So for me, this is a no. But looking at this, you've got lots of movement in the background. When I put my ruler on it, if you cut, you could end up with some really amazing blocks on something like this. So for me, this would be a yes. And then you look at something as silly as this. Now, this is my kids' fabric that I've got. I actually think this could be quite fun, because when you cut it out, you could end up with a whole load of upside down diggers, a whole load of cranes. I think this could be quite fun because it's not uniform. So for me, something like this would look really quite sweet. It's not something that I would do. It's probably halfway down my list. It's nowhere near the top. But again, all the shapes are different. All the designs are different. So for me, this would be a go. But when you look at this one, you can see that they're not very different. There's only 2 different flowers there. So doing this one wouldn't have as much interest. But doing something like that, you've got lots of interest. And you've got lots of different, if you're into diggers, you've got kids, grandchildren, whatever that may be into diggers, may love it. You might have a husband who's into it. You may have a girlfriend who's into it. You could have anything. They're sweet. It's a fun project to do. The fabric was not expensive at all. It's extra wide as well. Something like that could work very well. But it would look, for me, it would look better if you had some movement in the background, in the white space there. But again, if you don't do that, that's okay too. So what I've done now is I've shown you fabric that I think would work. I've shown you the difference on there. You're looking for something that excites you. You've got to make it. You've got to use it. You've got to be in love with it, and you've got to enjoy using it. There was another one. Now, when I say don't use something like that, okay? Now, K-Facet fabrics are amazing for these. His gorgeous bearded lilies. These are all Philip Jacobs fabrics, of course. But all those gorgeous, beautiful florals and things that he makes. Now, this is a Bernitex fabric. Sorry, it's a Studio E fabric from some time ago. And I've sold this to a lady who's going to make it into a stack and whack. Now, this, I think, is going to look phenomenal as a stack and whack. I think it's going to look beautiful. And the reason being, when you put your ruler onto the fabric, you can then see, yes, they're all the same, but it's got so much background movement and background background. There's not a single, you can see there, you're struggling to find a tiny bit of background. So something like this would look amazing because it's going to be so beautiful when you cut those up into the triangles and you then sew them all together and you end up with that on the center base with these on the outside. It's going to look gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. So something like this is also an option for you. The case, you're always going to win with the case. I remember somebody did one with the cabbage roses. Oh my gosh, absolutely delicious. You will love that. So just have a play. If you are interested in getting some help on it, by all means, we are running a Zoom class. We're going to do one short 45-minute, hour Zoom class to be able to then talk through fabric that you're going to be doing. These will all be available on my website. We're going to be doing them over the next month and a half. So there'll be different times and different places for them. First one's obviously going to be choosing your fabric. The second Zoom session is the pinning of your fabric. Of everything you do in this whole process, the pinning of your fabric is the most important. So that one, you can all hate me. I sit there and take abuse for the whole of the Zoom session and I'm happy to do it, but the pinning is so important. I tack 1-inch squares all the way around when I'm doing it properly, if it's something I really care about. 2-inch squares if I've got a little bit less time. 3-inch squares, so I'm doing 3-inch, 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 all the way tacking through all the layers. You must do what works for you. Personally, that's how I do it, to get it done as accurately as possible. Because if you don't, you do end up with blocks in the middle there where the points don't quite match. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that block. But imagine how much better it would be if it matched perfectly all the way along. So that's going to be our sessions there. Then obviously we've got the sewing together. So there will be free YouTube videos on each of these and how you get the process done. All available for you for free on YouTube, and the class then will be a tag-on edition in order to go through, double check you're happy with your fabric, double check you're happy with your ruler, and doing the whole process on it. How much fabric do you need? So, main thing to remember is how wide is your pattern repeat? This is a 24-inch pattern repeat, and I'm going to get my trusty calculator. First of all, that's the first thing. So as if you've got 24-inch pattern repeat, I work in meters because we're in the UK, you're going to need at least a minimum of 5 meters of fabric if it's a 24-inch pattern repeat. But remember, if you're doing a 24-inch pattern repeat and you're going to be doing a stack and whack, if you only get 5 meters, you've got none of the original fabric in to show people what it was before you cut it all up. So I always tell people, whatever you're going to be doing, whatever size you're going to buy, whatever fabric you're going to buy, I always buy, so if I've got 5 meters for the stack and whack, I will buy double. That's just me. I'm very fortunate I can afford to do that. I've got an enormous collection of fabric. But for me, it's a case of the whole quilt will then be that fabric. So I will use the borders. I'll put the borders on. Normally, I don't have enough for the backing because these quilts can be quite big. So this one will probably give you a king size quilt, if not a queen size quilt, probably about 80 to 100 inches square, this one, depending on your sashing and your cornerstones. So by doing the big repeat, you'll have a lot of fabric, but I buy 5 meters because I like to stick a good 6-8 inches on the sides because then all of the fabric is in there. So I'll if it's a 24-inch repeat, I'll do 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, and each of those 6 inches will be a different step along my repeat to go into my border. And if I've got fabric left over, all the blocks left over, my orphan blocks that I've got, I will put that on the back of the quilt with the leftover fabric. So this quilt, I think I've had 3.5 meters of fabric for this quilt. Okay, so this, I think, bear with, I'll just double check. With my borders and everything, it's coming in at 66 inches square. So this will be my front. And then for my back, I've got all these different blocks and I've got these pieces. So I'll piece that together and more than likely, I'll use this red as the coordinate that goes with it. So when you do it, when you're buying it, buy at least 8 repeats. I try and get 9 because when you're cutting, you may want to move your ruler up and down your repeat. So get 9 repeats as a minimum for your front for the making of the blocks, and then buy enough for a border on the back, border and the back. So that's what I would suggest. So this one, I did 3 meters and I've got a little bit left. Cornerstones. Everybody always asks me, what color should I buy for cornerstones? Unfortunately, the cornerstones come later in the process. And the reason being, this repeat, what color will be the color that pops out the most? Immediately, I would think this tealy, bluey, gorgeous, gorgeous petrol color here. But when you make the blocks, you may end up finding that the most predominant color is the green or the yellow or this pink. You know, this gorgeous pink that you've got here. You won't know until you put the blocks together. And then what I do is I say, take 10 of your blocks, go to your local quilt shop and put them down and put the solids underneath it and see which color pops for you the most. So the cornerstones and things, I always advise you to hang on to that. Don't do it just yet because you don't know what color your blocks are going to come out as. If you're doing a fabric colorway like this, which is just 2 or 3 colors, I would say do a dark gray or a black. So something like that, you know that this color is always going to be really strong. Doing that as your borders, gorgeous, you're sorted. If you like a softer quilt, do this cream, perfect, would look amazing. Because then by just doing that, it gives you a softer color. But if you're going for multiple colors like this, I always say hang on. Something like this that you're doing for your cornerstones, this cream would look amazing. But equally, these look amazing. But this one hasn't got as many colors as this. So if you're buying something like this, hold off for your cornerstones. How big will your cornerstones be? I used, on this one, you'll see when I use my ruler, as far as I recall, this was 7 3/4 inches. I'm just going to double check. So you can see, yes, it was just over 8 inches as my repeat there. And then my cornerstones came out, when I cut my cornerstones, because I always cut them quite big, I cut my cornerstones at 5.5 inches square. Sorry, 6 inches square. I cut my cornerstones. So again, it depends how many. If you're doing huge ones like this that you can trim down, which I always recommend, I normally say 1 meter should do you. But I normally buy 2 meters because then I can bind it in this color. When I put the quilt together, when I've got leftover fabric that I've used, I can put an inner border on it. So I'm binding it in this yellow. When I do it, I'm binding it in this yellow, but it's nice to have this little border here because I think by doing that, it ties all your colors in. Again, you don't have to buy it now. It can wait. You may make these blocks and think, oh my God, this is the worst process I've ever done. I hate it. In which case, don't waste money on the fabric for the cornerstones just yet. This is a new technique. It's something different. We're gonna try it. We're gonna have some fun, ladies and gentlemen, and I personally can't wait because it is my favoritist technique of this second FPP, or is it? Actually, no, I'd say this was more because it's the black magic of fabric. You get a piece of fabric that looks like this, and it's beautiful, and Renee has knocked it out of the park. So beautiful, really sweet. But then when you chop it up and you make these amazing blocks like this, you just think to yourself, oh my goodness, no way did Renee make these blocks thinking, oh goody, I'm going to make something like that. I mean, seriously, it's just so intricate and so different. And so I love it. I love it. So that is fabric. How much to buy? I always say buy the whole bolt. It's just easier. You've got it. And then if any of your friends want it, they can't have it because you've got it all. But I'm a fabric shop owner. I'm always trying to get people to buy as much fabric as they can possibly fit in their homes and then buy more and put an extension on. But that's just me. I'm not normally, yeah. But do what works for you. You need a minimum of 9 repeats just for your cutting. Get your borders. I always try and do the borders on that. You had the advice, do what works for you. Have fun, try it. If you're concerned and worried, drop me a message on Facebook. If you go facebook.com/iQuiltStudio, one word, that is me. I will be able to answer you as soon as I possibly can. I will then see you in a couple of days when we start talking about cutting and doing all of that. And do stay tuned for the announcement of the classes for this project. That'll be a follow-on for this. I do them 2-3 times a year just because I love them so much. So stay looking for those. Thank you so much for your time and patience in bearing with me with all of these. And let's get stitching. I can't wait. Have the most wonderful evening. Stay safe. And I'll see you all really soon. Bye-bye.